We have sent satellites into the deepest corners of the cosmos, mapped the stars, and split the atom. Yet the vast moving mass covering 70% of our own planet remains a total anomaly. Welcome to the secrets of the ocean, a world of dark geometry, where the strict mathematical equations of human science begin to completely shatter. The ocean is an arena constructed entirely on the relentless mathematics of violence. For 4 billion years, its unwritten ledger has been drafted in the precise language of teeth, kinetic velocity, and unyielding physical scale. To survive within the boundaries of the open blue, the rules are as ancient as they are absolute. You are either programmed to be a ghost that vanishes into the shadows, or you must become a monster that dominates them. The code of the deep dictates that you must outrun the crushing current, or you must possess the raw power to crush anything that crosses your path. There is no middle ground, no mercy for the hesitant, and no cosmic pity for the weak. Yet if you dare to slide away from the chaotic, high-velocity traffic of the deep water, if you steer your gaze toward the sun-drenched emerald fringes of the coast, you will find that the brutal algorithms of the arena begin to splinter. Here, hidden in the quiet corners of the world, lies the seagrass meadows. This is a deceptively tranquil coastal jungle, a vibrant kingdom that covers less than 1% of the global seafloor, yet holds the monumental responsibility of cradling nearly a quarter of all marine life on Earth. To the human eye, looking down from the surface, this place appears to be a sanctuary of absolute peace, a pastoral landscape of green blades swaying in perfect harmony with the tide. In reality, however, it is a labyrinth of invisible crossfires. Every emerald alleyway is a highly calculated hunting ground, a theater of hidden peril, where juvenile barracudas test their speed, predatory crabs lie in ambush within the mud, and swift gliding rays sweep across the floor like shadow executioners. And right here, clinging stubbornly to the very center of this ecological storm, lives perhaps the most beautiful anomaly in the history of marine evolution. Science classifies this creature as a fish, though he possesses the majestic, weathered face of a miniature horse, the independent rotating eyes of a forest chameleon, the prehensile gripping tail of a monkey, and the interlocking external armor of a medieval knight. He is a biological mosaic, a living contradiction wrapped in bone and skin. He cannot swim against even a moderate tide. A single powerful wave or a sudden storm can easily rip him from his anchorage, sentencing him to fatal exhaustion in the vast open spaces of the blue desert. He does not have the musculature to chase down his prey, nor does he possess the acceleration required to flee from a dedicated predator. He cannot bite, he cannot sting, and he cannot hide through speed. He is the fragile gladiator. By every traditional rule of natural selection, by every metric of predatory efficiency that we are taught to respect, this creature should not exist. He is an evolutionary design that defies the very physics of hydrodynamic efficiency. His tiny translucent dorsal fin flutters at an absurd, almost desperate rate of 35 beats per second, yet it barely grants him the power to move an inch forward. If the ocean is a machine that rewards the fast and the ferocious, then he is the beautiful system failure that refused to die. His secret weapon, you see, is not the capacity to conquer through physical force, but the absolute unwavering mastery of an entirely different art, the art of radical patience. While the rest of the ocean burns through vast, exhausting reservoirs of energy in an endless kinetic race for survival, this silent sentinel of the shifting grass chooses stillness. He anchors his prehensile tail to a secure stem of eelgrass, locks his independent eyes on the drifting world around him, and transforms his entire physical being into a living statue. He refuses to participate in the exhausting games of terror and pursuit that define the deeper waters. Instead, he waits for the universe to bring the sustenance to him. One eye tracks a potential threat approaching from behind, while the other locks onto a microscopic mysid shrimp drifting casually in the water column. He calculates the distance not in inches, but in milliseconds. When the spatial geometry is flawless, the fragile gladiator expands his bony snout, creating a powerful instantaneous internal vacuum. In less than 6 milliseconds, a fraction of the time it takes for a human eyelid to close, the prey simply ceases to exist in the open water. It is a masterclass in low-energy efficiency, a proof that power does not always belong to the loudest or the fastest, but to the one who can remain motionless the longest. But survival, through camouflage and patience, is only the opening act of his story. The true revolution of this species does not lie in the clever ways he preserves his own breath within the emerald jungle. The true wonder lies in how this fragile creature handles the sacred weight of tomorrow. In the heart of these shifting green fields, a courtship is beginning to unfold. It is not an act of sudden instinctual aggression that we so often witness in the cold depths of the open sea. It is a ritual of profound, synchronized vulnerability, a masterpiece of time, a rare alignment of mutual trust, and the ultimate beautiful subversion of the natural order. As a sleek female approaches his territory, the fragile gladiator prepares to do what no other male patriarch in the mammalian or avian world would ever dare to attempt. He is about to inherit the burden of life itself. The courtship of the fragile gladiator is not a transaction born of fleeting impulse. It is an architectural masterpiece of trust built over days of synchronized movement. In a realm where revealing your presence to the world invites immediate destruction, these two souls choose to shed their camouflage. They slowly abandon the safety of the dark mud, lifting their bodies into the open water column between the emerald blades. The female approaches with a delicate, fluid grace, her sleeker form contrasting with the male's structured frame. As their eyes lock, a chemical shift occurs beneath their bony armor. The dull, mottled browns and greens of their daily survival camouflage begin to melt away, replaced by a radiant, almost luminous flush of golden yellow and soft iridescent pink. It is a visual declaration of intent, a flag raised in defiance of the predatory eyes that surround them. They begin to mimic one another. When she sways to the left, leaning into the gentle roll of the coastal tide, he mirrors her trajectory with mathematical precision. They wrap their prehensile tails around the same single blade of seagrass, anchoring their fates to a common center. For hours and sometimes days, this quiet ballet continues. It is a vital testing of the spirits. They are calibrating their internal rhythms, ensuring that their biological clocks are ticking in flawless harmony. In the open sea, an uncoordinated union is a waste of genetic energy, a mistake that the harsh law of natural selection punishes with extinction. They cannot afford a single mistimed beat. As the ritual reaches its zenith, the true subversion of nature begins to materialize. The female rises slightly higher in the water column, her posture signaling the moment of total surrender. She arches her body, aligning herself with the male's distended, forward-facing brood pouch, an empty vessel waiting to be transformed into a sanctuary. With exquisite care, she inserts her ovipositor into the opening of his pouch. In a quiet, suspended window of time that lasts only a few dozen seconds, she transfers hundreds of nutrient-rich, unfertilized eggs directly into his body. She has played her part in the genetic continuum. She has gifted him the raw material of the future, and now she untangles her tail from the grass and drifts away into the green labyrinth, leaving him entirely alone. The torch has been passed. The patriarch is now the protector, the vessel and the mother all at once. Inside the dark, enclosed ecosystem of the father's pouch, a profound biological miracle begins to take shape. The male seahorse does not merely hold these eggs, he adopts them into his very identity. His body immediately begins to secrete a specialized placental fluid, rich in oxygen and critical lipids, tailored specifically to nurture each expanding embryo. He actively regulates the salinity within the pouch, matching it precisely to the chemistry of the surrounding ocean, so that his children will not shock their fragile systems when they finally meet the sea. He shields them from the external pressures of the currents, absorbing the physical tolls of the environment into his own tissues. For weeks, his abdomen expands, swelling to a grotesque, heavy proportion that strips him of what little swimming agility he once possessed. He becomes slow, heavy, and immensely vulnerable, a sitting target for any wandering hunter. Yet he holds his ground, clinging to his blade of grass with the unyielding grip of a father who knows that his stillness is the only thing keeping a generation alive. Then the hour of reckoning arrives. The sanctuary must now become a launching pad. The father experiences a sudden, violent chemical signal that plunges his miniature body into the throes of true labor. His quiet existence is shattered by fierce, rhythmic, muscular contractions that ripple across his abdomen. He can no longer remain a passive statue. He twists his frame in agonizing arcs, bending backward and forward against the rigid stem of the eelgrass, using every ounce of his remaining physical strength to force the pouch open. With a sudden, explosive contraction, he expels the first cloud of life. Dozens, then hundreds of miniature translucent replicas of himself are propelled out of his body and into the shifting currents of the open water. They are no larger than a grain of sand, born with fully formed eyes and tiny, perfectly engineered prehensile tails, drifting like dust motes through the golden shafts of sunlight. The father does not rest. Another wave of contractions grips his body. He strains, he contorts, he gives everything he is, repeating this exhausting cycle over several hours until thousands of tiny souls have been launched into the arena. When the final contraction subsides, the field is quiet once more. The cloud of thousands of tiny fry has already begun to scatter, swept away by the indifferent hands of the coastal tide. They drift into the vastness of the seagrass meadows without a backward glance, completely independent from the moment of their birth, left to face the barracudas and the crabs on their own terms. Behind them, anchored to the same faded stem of grass, rests the father. He is pale, entirely depleted of energy and visibly shrunk. His pouch hangs loose and empty. He does not chase after them. He does not offer a protective hand. He has already given them the greatest gift possible in the ledger of survival, a flawless beginning. Housed within this quiet, exhausted fish is a lesson that echoes far beyond the shallow margins of the coast. We are taught by the brutal history of the land that power is defined by dominance, that the masculine ideal is measured by the capacity to conquer, to claim territory, and to inflict force upon the world. But the ocean shatters this narrow human mirror. Here in the dim green light of the underwater forest, this fragile patriarch rewrites the fundamental laws of strength. He reminds us that true power does not always roar in the strike of an apex predator or flash in the speed of a fleeing school. Sometimes the most revolutionary force in nature is silent. It is a power that chooses to stand still, a strength that welcomes the burden of vulnerability, and a heart that is entirely willing to be broken and emptied, so that the beautiful song of life may simply continue. To fully understand the revolution taking place within the seagrass meadows, one must look past the external silhouette of the male seahorse and peer into the quiet, dark architecture of his abdomen. In the traditional theater of nature, A male's biological investment in the next generation is often brief, a momentary contribution of genetic code followed by an immediate return to the selfish mechanics of personal survival. The deep ocean is filled with absentee fathers who vanish into the currents long before their offspring ever breach their shells. But here, the fragile gladiator enters a state of solitary confinement, initiating a physiological metamorphosis that redefines the very boundaries of what it means to give life. The moment the female departs, leaving hundreds of soft, translucent spheres resting within his brood pouch, a silent internal alarm is triggered. The pouch is no longer just a flap of skin, no longer a passive pocket for storage. It seals itself shut against the outside world, transforming instantly into a highly complex, life-giving ecosystem. The father's body immediately begins to rewire its own internal priorities. Resources that were once used to maintain his own stamina are diverted. Every heartbeat he commands is now dedicated to a collective destiny. Within the walls of this fleshy sanctuary, a dense network of capillaries swells with warm, oxygen-rich blood wrapping around each individual egg like a crimson embrace. This is not merely a holding pattern. It is an active, aggressive nurturing. The father's internal tissue begins to secrete a specialized, nutrient-dense fluid that bathes the developing embryos, providing them with the critical lipids, proteins, and minerals necessary to construct their tiny skeletal plates and delicate organs. He is, in the most literal sense, dissolving a part of his own physical reserves to synthesize the bodies of his children. His flesh becomes their foundation. His energy becomes their pulse. But the genius of this masculine womb extends far beyond basic nutrition. The open ocean is a volatile chemical chaos where fluctuations in temperature and water chemistry can prove instantly fatal to a newborn organism. To counter this, the father acts as a living thermostat and a chemical gatekeeper. He possesses an extraordinary instinctual ability to monitor and regulate the osmolarity within the pouch. Throughout the weeks of gestation, his body carefully alters the salinity of the internal fluid, gradually shifting its composition to match the exact chemical signature of the external sea. He is preparing them for the shock of reality. He is teaching their microscopic cells how to breathe the ocean before they have even seen the light of day. It is an act of meticulous calibration, a slow, silent bridge built between the absolute safety of the dark interior and the unforgiving wildness of the coastal waters. As the days turn into weeks, the weight of this devotion begins to extract a terrible, visible toll. The fragile gladiator can no longer hide with the effortless ease of his youth. His abdomen swells to an unnatural heavy proportion, stretching the skin so taut that the individual bony rings of his armor are forced apart, exposing the vulnerable tissues beneath. The sleek vertical line that allowed him to mimic a single blade of grass is gone. He is now distorted, anchored to a single stem by a tail that must grip with twice the force just to hold his bloated body upright. Every movement is now an agonizing exercise in physics. His tiny dorsal fin must work in frantic, exhausting overdrive just to prevent him from capsizing into the mud. He cannot hunt effectively. His strikes lose their millisecond precision because the sheer mass of his belly throws off his balance. He is hungry, he is depleted, and he is dangerously conspicuous. To any passing predator, a hunting crab or a juvenile snapper, he is no longer a cloaked ghost. He is a slow-moving feast, a heavy target carrying a treasure trove of protein. Yet, pinned down by the gravity of his own creation, the father refuses to let go. He endures the starvation, he welcomes the exhaustion, and he remains anchored in the shadows, holding his breath as the world of predators cruises just inches above his head. Inside the dark chamber, the microlives are waking up. Hundreds of tiny eyes are forming. Tiny, translucent tails are beginning to twitch against the dark walls of the pouch. They have consumed his fluids, they have breathed his oxygen, and they have grown robust on his sacrifice. The ecosystem that created them is reaching its structural limit. The chamber is overcrowded, the pressure is mounting, and the chemical clock is ticking down to zero. The time for quiet incubation is over, and the arena is calling. The father can feel the internal shifting, a restless collective surge of energy that signals the end of his solitary vigil. He prepares himself for the final brutal trial of his transformation, a physical crucible that will demand the absolute evaporation of his remaining strength. The dawn that breaks over the shallow reef brings no peace, only a tightening of the chemical vice. Deep within the nerve centers of the father's exhausted body, a sudden violent cascade of hormones triggers the final act of his transformation. The sanctuary must now become a forge. The quiet, protective internal climate shatters as his abdominal muscles collapse inward, initiating a sequence of fierce, uncontrollable contractions that rack his miniature frame. This is no longer the gentle rhythm of a creature swaying with the tide. This is a violent, localized earthquake of bone and muscle. He is gripped by an ancient, instinctual agony that forces his body to bend backward in a desperate, rigid crescent, his snout pointing toward the sky as he fights for every breath of oxygen-depleted water. He anchors his prehensile tail around a calcified stem of dead coral, gripping it with a white-knuckled intensity. His tiny dorsal fin flutters erratically, a broken motor trying to stabilize a vessel tearing itself apart from the inside. The skin of his pouch grows dangerously translucent, stretched to the absolute tearing point, revealing the frantic churning storm of silver bodies trapped within. He contorts. He shudders. He twists. He strains. He gives everything he is so that they may simply begin. With a sudden convulsive spasm, the seal of the pouch ruptures. A dense, cloud-like eruption of life is propelled into the open water. Dozens, then hundreds of miniature souls are thrown headfirst into the current. They are perfect, microscopic architects of survival, smaller than a single clover seed, yet born with fully open eyes and tiny, functional tails that instantly attempt to latch onto anything that drifts past. But their arrival does not go unnoticed. The chemistry of the birth, the sudden release of amniotic fluids, and the sheer kinetic movement of the cloud sends an invisible acoustic flare tearing through the seagrass jungle. The predators are waking up. From the dark edges of the mud, juvenile snappers and predatory prawns begin to emerge, drawn by the scent of a helpless harvest. To them, this cloud of newborns is not a miracle. It is an unprotected buffet of pure protein. They dart to the water column, their jaws snapping with clinical precision, devouring dozens of the drifting fry in mere seconds. The arena does not offer a grace period. For these tiny clones of the father, the first breath they take is filled with the shadow of death. They are entirely on their own, caught in a lottery where the odds of survival are stacked 1,000 to 1 against them. Yet despite the slaughter unfolding just inches from his head, the father cannot offer a shield. He is trapped in his own private purgatory. Another wave of contractions grips his abdomen deeper and more punishing than the last. He bends his body almost in two, his plate armor creaking under the structural strain, using the rigid coral stem as a fulcrum to squeeze the remaining lives from his flesh. He forces out another burst, and then another, repeating this agonizing cycle for hours under the watchful, hungry eyes of the reef. He is emptying his own house, delivering his children directly into the jaws of a world that wants to consume them, paralyzed by the brutal reality that this is the only way his lineage can endure. When the sun finally reaches its highest point, the crucible falls silent. The contractions cease, leaving the water clear once more. The vast cloud of thousands of offspring has vanished, some swallowed by the currents, others by the resident hunters, and a lucky few hidden deep within the dark, protective crevices of the grass. The father remains anchored to the coral, a hollowed-out shell of a creature. His once proud, heavy belly is now a deflated, wrinkled pocket of pale skin. He is so utterly depleted that his independent eyes can barely track the shadows moving around him. His armor is bruised, his internal energy reserves are entirely spent, and he hangs limp in the water, looking more like a piece of drifting ocean debris than a living being. He has looked into the mouth of death, allowed his body to be broken, and asked for nothing in return. We look at this display of natural sacrifice and we call it cruel. We look at a father delivering his own children into an environment teeming with executioners, and we see a tragedy of cosmic proportions. But the ocean does not operate on human sentimentality. It operates on the grand architecture of the ultimate gamble. This crucible of labor shatters our comfortable definitions of success and safety. It forces us to realize that nature does not guarantee an easy path, nor does it protect the innocent from the storm. The father's seahorse does not fail because his children are eaten. He succeeds because he gave them the weapon of existence. He proves to us that the true value of a life is not measured by how long it is sheltered from danger, but by the raw courage of the one who endured the furnace to give it a voice. In the grand economy of the deep, the cradle and the battlefield are the exact same place. And the most profound act of love is not holding on, but having the strength to let go into the wild. The aftermath of creation is not marked by celebration, but by a heavy, breathless exhaustion that settles over the seagrass canopy. As the last of the tiny translucent fry are pulled away by the invisible fingers of the tide, the arena returns to its cold baseline reality. The thousands of lives that were just forged in the furnace of the Father's flesh are gone, scattered into a vast green wilderness where memory does not exist. There are no maternal calls to gather the scattered flock, no protective wings to hover over the weary, and no recognition from the children of the price that was paid for their first breath. They drift away into the emerald maze as total strangers to the one who engineered their heartbeat, driven by a raw, immediate instinct that commands them to hide, to hunt, and to forget. Left behind in the quiet wake of the storm, the male seahorse hangs motionless, looking like a ghost trapped within the decaying geometry of the shallows. He is completely pale, his vibrant courting pigments of gold and pink entirely drained from his tissues, replaced by a dull ash-gray coloration that matches the dying grass around him. His prehensile tail is wrapped around a single weathered blade of eelgrass, but the grip is loose, trembling under the slight pressure of the coastal drift. His brood pouch, which for weeks was a tense, swollen fortress of life, now sags against his chest, a deflated, wrinkled vacuum of skin that serves as a grim monument to his total physical depletion. He is a creature operating on the absolute margins of biological bankruptcy. Every resource has been extracted, every capillary strained, and every internal reserve dissolved to construct the bodies of his offspring. To look at him now is to witness the true cost of selflessness in a world that rewards only the selfish. He does not move to groom his wounds. He does not summon the energy to strike at the microscopic organisms drifting within an inch of his snout. His independent eyes, once so sharp and vigilant, roll slowly in their sockets, heavy with a profound fatigue that threatens to loosen his hold on the grass and cast him into the fatal oblivion of the open sea. He is completely alone, a hollowed-out vessel adrift in a sanctuary that offers no comfort to the fallen. The predators that patrolled the perimeter during the frenzy of the birth have moved on, tracking the drifting cloud of fry into the deeper channels. The sudden chaotic burst of energy that defined the crucible of labor has vanished, leaving only the rhythmic, monotonous rustle of the vegetation swaying in the sunbeams. The ocean, in its immense and terrifying indifference, does not acknowledge the sacrifice. The sun continues to fracture through the surface water, the current continues its mindless circuit, and the emerald forest continues to grow over the mud. Nature does not pause to offer a benediction for the Father's survival, nor does it keep a record of the lives that were lost in the first minutes of the dawn. It demands that the gladiator rest in the shadows, unremembered and unthanked, while the relentless machinery of the ecosystem grinds onward around his broken frame. As the shadow of a passing ray glides over the meadow, the exhausted patriarch pulls himself tighter against the stem of grass, a subconscious reflex of a survival instinct that refuses to yield. He has survived the furnace. He has emptied his house, surrendered his strength, and stood completely still while the world around him threatened to tear him apart. He did not possess the jaws of a shark, the speed of a tuna, or the venom of a stonefish. He had only a pocket of skin, a steady grip, and an infinite capacity to suffer in silence. And in that quiet, unglamorous endurance, he achieved something that no apex predator can ever accomplish. He guaranteed the continuation of his world without destroying another. We are a species obsessed with the architecture of power. We build our histories around the kings who conquered the armies that marched and the ruthless efficiency of those who climbed to the top of the pyramid by flattening everything beneath them. When we look at the natural world, we carry this same narrow mirror, projecting our worship of dominance onto the wild. We write textbooks about the lion's strike, the eagle's eye, and the wolf's jaw, convincing ourselves that the global ledger of evolution is balanced only by the blood of the defeated. We are taught that to be strong is to be fierce, and to survive is to conquer. But if you sit quietly in the dim green light of these shallow waters, the fragile gladiator shatters that entire human illusion. In the ledger of classic evolution, we are taught that power belongs to the ruthless. Yet here in the quiet shallows, this miniature patriarch shatters the paradigm. He proves that in the vast, unforgiving expanses of the sea, the ultimate measure of strength is not the capacity to inflict pain, but the willingness to bear it so that others may live. He changes our understanding of what it means to be a guardian. He shows us that the most radical act of courage is not the charge into battle, but the choice to become a shield. True power does not always roar in the open blue or flash its teeth in the hunt. Sometimes it is found in a creature that cannot even swim against the tide, yet possesses a spirit heavy enough to anchor an entire generation against the storm. The father seahorse is a beautiful anomaly, a quiet revolutionary who proves that under the surface of this violent planet there is a deeper law at work. A law that declares that the ultimate victory of life does not belong to those who take, but to those who give until they have nothing left but a breath and a promise. The tide begins to turn, bringing fresh, nutrient-dense water from the shelf into the emerald jungle. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a hint of color begins to return to the gladiator's snout. His translucent fin hitches, finding its rhythm once more at 35 beats per second. He adjusts his tail, resetting his anchor on the shifting grass, and turns one independent eye toward the incoming drift. The transition is complete. The father has returned to the sentinel.
The unassuming seahorse
He has crossed
is one
the
of the most
crucible,
remarkable
paid the
hunters
tax
of the ocean.
future,
Every
and now he
oddly
prepares to wait again. For the song of the sea is long, the currents never sleep, and the ballad of the blue demands that even the most fragile of gladiators must stand his ground. But the shifting grass is not the only theater where survival demands a rewriting of the rules. If you follow the turning tide as it breaks away from the coastal shallows, the ocean reveals its most dazzling, deceptive masterpiece, the coral reef. From a distance, it appears as a magnificent polychromatic jewel beneath the waves, a sun-drenched paradise where life explodes in every conceivable hue of neon and gold. It is often celebrated as the rainforest of the sea, a bustling marine metropolis teeming with infinite energy and architectural wonder. But do not let the beauty blind you to the mathematics of the terrain. The coral reef is, in truth, an hyper-condensed urban jungle built on absolute unyielding competition. It is a crowded, hyper-vigilant landscape where every square inch of territory is fought for with evolutionary desperation, and where every beautifully chiseled crevice hides a calculated killer. In this metropolis, danger does not merely patrol the open water. It is woven into the very fabric of the architecture. Moray eels sit like coiled springs within the dark limestone basements, their double jaws waiting to clamp down on the unsuspecting. Camouflaged stonefish rest on the rubble, completely indistinguishable from the rock, armed with dorsal spines loaded with neurotoxins that can stop a heart in minutes. Coral trout and reef sharks cruise the high-traffic avenues with clinical focus, their eyes scanning for the slightest tremor of weakness or hesitation. This is a high-stakes, fast-moving arena where a single millimeter of error, a single moment of spatial carelessness is immediately converted into a casualty. To survive here, a species must possess devastating speed, impenetrable heavy armor, or the ability to vanish completely into the background. Yet flashing through the crowded corridors of this lethal paradise is a creature that defies all three of these foundational principles. With his bright, unmistakable coat of vivid orange split by stark cinematic bands of porcelain white and outlined in sharp jet black, he is one of the most visible targets on the entire reef. He does not possess the sleek, hydrodynamic lines of a hunter. His rounded, paddle-like fins give him a clumsy, undulating swimming style that looks more like a frantic dance than an efficient traversal of water. He is slow, he is conspicuous, and he lacks any form of natural weaponry. He has no sharp teeth, no defensive barbs, and no evolutionary speed to outrun a dedicated pursuer. By all the brutal metrics of this underwater city, he is the defenseless exile, an easy neon-lit meal that should have been wiped off the ledger of the reef millions of years ago. If he were to rely on his own physical prowess, his life expectancy would be measured in minutes. But this little exile possesses an audacity that borders on madness. He does not seek shelter in the traditional crowded fortresses of the rock or the deep labyrinths of the coral caves, where larger, fiercer fish fight for dominance. Instead, he and his small family, the daring tenants, have set their sights on a piece of real estate that every other sensible creature on the reef avoids at all costs. They have chosen to construct their sanctuary within the swaying, elegant arms of a monster. They seek their home not in spite of the danger, but because of it, turning their gaze toward a creature that is the very definition of a living minefield. Resting on the sunlit shelf of the limestone rock is the destination of their daring ambition, a giant sea anemone. To the casual observer, she is a vision of mesmerizing floral elegance, her hundreds of long, flesh-colored tentacles swaying lazily in the current, like a field of wildflowers answering a gentle autumn wind. But this is the beautiful executioner. She is a predatory carnivore, wrapped in the illusion of botany, a sedentary terror whose elegant arms are packed with millions of microscopic, spring-loaded harpoons known as nematocysts. Each individual needle is loaded with a paralyzing, tissue-destroying cocktail of neurotoxins. A passing damselfish or a careless wrasse that accidentally brushes against these soft tresses is instantly snagged, pierced by 1,000 chemical spears, paralyzed in milliseconds, and slowly dragged into the central mouth to be digested alive. She is the toxic matriarch, a fortress of needles that treats the entire world as food. To step inside this fortress is an act of suicide for almost any living thing on the reef. But for the daring tenants, it is an essential pilgrimage. The young clownfish does not simply dive into the venomous canopy. To do so would trigger an immediate lethal response from the anemone's chemical sensors, resulting in a swift and agonizing death. Instead, he must perform a dangerous, meticulous initiation ritual, a life or death ballet that requires hours of flawless precision and absolute nerves of steel. He approaches the perimeter of the stinging forest with extreme caution, his rounded fins fluttering as he hovers just centimeters away from the swaying wall of death. The dance begins with a single, tentative touch. The clownfish moves forward and allows just the very tip of his tail fin to brush against the outer edge of a venomous tentacle. The anemone's needles fire, stinging him, but the dosage is low. He immediately retreats, enduring the localized pain, and waits. Then he returns. For hours, he repeats this agonizingly slow process, hovering closer and closer, deliberately brushing different parts of his belly, his sides, and his face against the lethal needles. He is engaged in a profound act of biological deception. With each controlled brush, his skin absorbs the chemical signature of the anemone's own mucus, blending it with a specialized, thick coat of his own making. He is systematically rewriting his own outer identity, painting himself in the chemical colors of the executioner. It is a terrifying gamble. A single moment of impatience, a sudden panic that causes him to crash too deeply into the tentacles before his chemical shield is complete and the toxic matriarch will recognize him as prey and close her trap. But the exile does not rush the mathematics of trust. He endures the minor stings, calibrating his skin with beautiful, stubborn patience until the transformation is absolute. Finally, after hours of calculated exposure, the initiation ritual reaches its silent conclusion. The clownfish moves forward, no longer hesitating, and slides his entire bright orange body deep into the very heart of the venomous canopy. The tentacles brush over his eyes, across his gills, and wrap around his torso. But the needles do not fire. The chemical deception is flawless. The monster has been tricked into recognizing the fish not as an intruder, not as a meal, but as a part of her own physical being. The defenseless exile has successfully crossed the threshold of the minefield, finding his crown and his fortress in the very place where the rest of the ocean finds only an executioner. Once the toxic threshold has been crossed, the nature of the relationship between the toxic matriarch and the daring tenants undergoes a profound transformation. To the casual observer watching from the sunlit avenues of the reef, it appears as a simple case of exploitation, a small, vulnerable fish hiding like a coward behind the chemical shields of a passive monster. It is easy to look at this arrangement and assume that the clownfish is a mere parasite, a clever squatter taking advantage of a fortress it did not build, and a security system it does not pay for. But the ocean rarely permits a one-sided transaction to endure across the centuries of natural selection. If the clownfish were nothing more than a burden, a useless consumer of space, the relationship would inevitably collapse under the weight of evolutionary efficiency. In reality, what unfolds within these swaying, lethal tresses is a masterclass in diplomacy, a highly structured strategic alliance where both parties trade critical services in an endless reciprocal loop of survival. The daring tenants do not live in the anemone for free. They pay their rent in the currency of labor vigilance and fierce territorial defense. The sea anemone, despite her terrifying arsenal of microscopic harpoons, is surprisingly vulnerable to specific specialized predators of the reef. Chief among her enemies are the beautiful disc-shaped butterfly fish, agile, fast-moving hunters armed with long, specialized snouts designed specifically to pick at the anemone's tentacles, biting them off piece by piece from outside her reach until she is stripped bare and left to die. Against these fast-moving raiders, the sedentary matriarch is entirely defenseless. She cannot chase them, and she cannot hide her massive form within the rock. But her tiny tenants act as a highly aggressive, localized security force. The moment a predatory butterfly fish approaches the perimeter, the little clownfish transforms from a clumsy, undulating dancer into a fierce, territorial warrior. Infused with an audacity that defies their physical scale, they charge out from the tentacles, flaring their fins and snapping their jaws with absolute fury, driving the much larger invader away from their host. They are the frontline infantry guarding the borders of the kingdom with a loyalty that is as fierce as it is essential. And the domestic labor does not stop at the borders. Inside the forest of needles, the clownfish function as diligent caretakers, meticulous servants who keep the fortress in flawless operational condition. They cruise through the toxic canopy, grooming the tentacles by picking away trapped debris, dead tissue, and parasitic organisms that could cause infection or restrict the anemone's health. Furthermore, their constant, frantic swimming movement within the core of the host serves a vital aerodynamic purpose. By endlessly undulating their fins among the tentacles, they generate a continuous artificial current that pumps fresh, oxygen-dense water directly into the anemone's central body mass. This gentle ventilation dramatically increases the host's respiration efficiency, allowing her to grow larger, healthier, and more formidable than she ever could in isolation. It is a brilliant closed-loop economy of survival. The fish provides the mobility, the defense, and the breath, while the monster provides the sovereign territory. This alliance reaches its deepest level of intimacy at the very base of the anemone's column, where the toxic matriarch attaches her muscular foot to the limestone rock. Here, completely shielded by the overhanging canopy of venomous tresses, the clownfish family constructs their nursery. The female deposits a patch of hundreds of translucent capsule-shaped eggs directly onto the cleared stone, creating a miniature city of future lives right beneath the executioner's blades. The father takes over the watch, hovering over the nest, fanning the eggs with his fins to keep them clean and oxygenated. They have placed their entire genetic future within the shadow of death, trusting their chemical camouflage to protect them from the very floor they sleep on. But the strength of this sovereign border is about to be tested by the true weight of the reef's predatory hierarchy. From the deep blue shadows beyond the reef, crest a massive shape materializes. It is a giant grouper, a 300-pound apex hunter, a living boulder of muscle and jaw that has spent decades patrolling these avenues. He moves with a terrifying slow-motion confidence, his massive pectorals displacing the water with heavy, silent authority. He is not a calculated picker like the butterfly fish. He is a devourer of worlds. His shadow falls over the anemone, immediately swallowing the golden sunlight, plunging the entire coral apartment into a cold, ominous twilight. The clownfish instantly recognize the shift in the pressure wave. The bravado of their defense vanishes in the presence of this ancient titan. They retreat, pulling their bright orange bodies deep into the very core of the anemone, packing themselves tight against the limestone rock right next to their unhatched eggs. The giant grouper cruises closer, his massive dinner plate eye rolling downward to lock on to the neon targets flashing within the tresses. He hovers just inches away, his cavernous mouth close enough to create a vacuum that pulls at the outer tentacles. The clownfish freeze, their hearts hammering against their tiny ribs, as the massive predator glares through the forest of needles. A single misstep, a millimeter of bare skin exposed without its chemical armor, and the home becomes the executioner. The giant grouper holds his position, his gills flaring as he contemplates the barrier. He knows the power of the toxic matriarch. He has felt the sting of her harpoons in his youth, and he respects the boundary of her sovereign border. He recognizes that to reach these bright little targets, he must pay a price in blinding pain and tissue damage that no sensible hunter would ever accept. The mathematics of the strike do not balance. With a slow, indifferent sweep of his massive caudal fin, the Titan turns away, dissolving back into the deep blue void from which he emerged. The golden spears of sunlight fracture through the water once more, illuminating the swaying green and pink tresses. The daring tenants slowly exhale their rounded fins, beginning to flutter once more as they rise from the base of the stone to resume their endless grooming. They have looked into the abyss of a predator's jaw and remained entirely untouched, not because they were strong enough to fight, not because they were fast enough to flee, but because they had the wisdom to weave themselves into the armor of another. They have proven that in the crowded, hyper-violent metropolis of the reef, true security is not found by building isolated castles of iron, but by mastering the delicate, dangerous art of the absolute alliance, finding your peace right at the epicenter of the poison. The passing of the Titan leaves behind a quiet, suspended clarity within the fortress of Needles. For 7 days and 7 nights, the father clownfish has maintained his relentless, exhausting vigil at the base of the toxic matriarch's column. He has barely eaten. His bright orange coat has grown slightly matte under the weight of constant alertness, and his fins are weary from the unceasing labor of fanning the nest. But beneath his protective canopy, the miniature metropolis of future lives has undergone a radical transformation. The hundreds of translucent capsules, which began as simple amber-colored dots on the barren limestone rock, have grown deep silver and intensely luminous. Through the thin microscopic membranes of the shells, 2 massive dark eyes now stare out into the twilight of the reef. The heartbeat of a new generation is vibrating against the stone, ready to rupture the boundaries of its confinement. The hour of their exodus is governed by the absolute celestial mechanics of the planet. As the sun dips below the western horizon, plunging the coral metropolis into a deep purple darkness, the moon rises to pull at the architecture of the tides. The water level rises and the currents over the reef crest intensify, creating a high-volume fluid highway that will serve as the canvas for their departure. Inside the sanctuary, a synchronized chemical signal sweeps through the nest. The silver capsules begin to crack. One by one, then in rapid explosive succession, the tiny neonates burst from their shells headfirst into the dark water. They are microscopic, transparent slivers of life, completely devoid of the bright orange and porcelain white banners that their parents wear. They possess no armor, no defense, and no experience. Only an immediate, instinctual urge to swim upward toward the starlight. The father stands down, stepping back into the deeper recesses of the tentacles as the cloud of his children rises from the stone. The toxic matriarch, whose venomous harpoons just hours ago protected these very lives from the jaws of the giant grouper, remains entirely passive, her long arms swaying lazily in the nocturnal current, like a quiet benediction. The neonates do not linger to groom their host. They do not look back at the father who starved himself to give them breath. They are immediately caught by the sweeping hands of the rising tide, pulled out from the safety of the poisonous canopy and cast directly into the vast, unpredictable expanse of the open reef. They drift away as floating dust motes into a dark wilderness teeming with nocturnal hunters, completely exposed to the elements, leaving the sanctuary of their birth behind forever. The exodus is swift, cold, and absolute. In less than an hour, the limestone rock at the base of the column is empty once more, stripped of its silver capsules, leaving only the faint circular scars where the eggs were anchored to the stone. The father cruises slowly over the abandoned nursery, his belly deflated, his senses dull with fatigue. He does not chase the current. He does not try to shield them from the dark water beyond the crest. He has already fulfilled his contract with the future. He has used the poison of the world to build a cradle for his lineage. And now he folds his fins and slides back into the familiar stinging embrace of his host, disappearing into the beautiful minefield that has become his only true anchor on this volatile planet. The night deepens over the coral city, burying the violent dramas of the day beneath a heavy shroud of ink and starlight. The neonates are gone, carried away on a trajectory where the survival rate is measured in fractions of a percent. Many will be consumed before the dawn. A few will find distant reefs to begin the cycle anew. But the architecture of their origin remains unchanged. The toxic matriarch continues to swing her lethal tresses in the current, ready to paralyze the next careless traveler, while the small remaining family of clownfish groom her flesh and guard her borders with unyielding devotion. They sleep in the very mouth of the executioner, their breath synchronized with the rhythm of her poison, completely at peace within the center of the storm. We live our lives trapped within a human psychology of defense. From the moment we wake to the moment we close our eyes, we are engaged in an endless, exhausting effort to build walls against the things that terrify us. We insulate ourselves from discomfort. We construct fortresses of isolation to escape the unpredictability of our peers. And we treat every unknown variable as a potential threat to our survival. We are taught by our fears that safety is a product of distance, that to protect what we love, we must flee from the venom, banish the danger, and conquer anything that possesses the power to hurt us. We consume our energy building castles of cold iron, only to find that the walls we constructed to keep the monsters out have transformed into the cages that keep us small. But if you dare to look past the superficial terror of the reef, the little exile and the beautiful executioner offer a truth that shatters our entire understanding of security. We spend our lives building walls against the things that terrify us, but the ocean offers a more profound wisdom. It shows us that survival does not always require fleeing from the danger. Sometimes it requires making peace with the poison finding shelter in the very place others fear to tread, and realizing that the most beautiful sanctuaries are often forged from absolute trust. They redefine the very meaning of peace. They show us that a sanctuary is not a place where danger is absent. It is a relationship where danger has been understood, balanced, and transformed into a mutual salvation. The little clownfish did not survive by destroying the monster or by running away to find an easier home. He survived by walking directly into the needles, enduring the pain of initiation, and discovering the hidden vulnerability within the heart of the terror itself. He proved that under the surface of this unforgiving world, the most lethal boundaries can be rewired by the mathematics of diplomacy and the sheer audacity of trust. The first light of the new day begins to fracture through the eastern water column, painting the coral metropolis in soft shades of amber and rose. The neon targets of the clownfish's coat begin to flash once more through the swaying tresses as they rise to meet the dawn. They do not fear the needles that cradle their bodies. They do not resent the poison that keeps the world at bay. For they have learned the deepest secrets of the toxic sanctuary, that when you have the courage to make peace with the executioner, the minefield vanishes, leaving behind only a home, a future, and a bond that not even the titans of the deep can ever break. Leave behind the hypercondensed urban friction of the coral reef. shake off the stinging memory of the toxic sanctuary, and the ocean opens up into its truest, most terrifying dimension: the open pelagic void. Here, space is no longer measured in centimeters or reef apartments, but in thousands of miles of trackless blue desert. In this colossal landscape, survival requires an entirely different order of magnitude. It demands a scale of wisdom and physical endurance that can match the global respiration of the planet itself. To find the true heartbeat of this wandering wilderness, we must travel past the equator, leaving the warm shallows behind, and head toward the extreme, unforgiving margins of the far north, the frozen empires of the Arctic. But the clock in the lagoon is ticking. This sun-drenched nursery is an island of borrowed time. The warm waters that protect the calf cannot offer sustenance to the mother. She is actively starving her 40-ton body, slowly wasting away, as she converts her own remaining flesh into milk for her child. For the next few weeks, they must work around the clock. The matriarch guides her son through endless swimming drills, teaching him how to position his body behind her massive shoulders to draft in her wake, saving his energy for the thousands of miles of open ocean that lie ahead. She is preparing him for the gauntlet. She is teaching him the language of the currents, the rhythm of the waves, and the internal discipline required to face a highway teeming with predators. As the winter begins to wane, the shallow lagoons grow crowded and restless. The warm water that once felt like a sanctuary begins to feel small, a temporary shelter whose walls are beginning to dissolve. The innocent voyager has learned to breathe. He has learned to swim, and he has tasted the unyielding love of the ancient matriarch. But his true initiation is yet to come. Beyond the protective sandbars of Baja, the open Pacific is waiting, a vast, cold, and predatory wilderness where the wolf packs of the deep are already gathering their forces. The mother looks out toward the horizon, feels the shifting temperature of the incoming tide, and raises her massive flukes. The nursery is closed, the classroom is empty, and the great northward odyssey is about to begin. To the human imagination, the subarctic waters of the Bering Sea appear as a desolate, monochromatic purgatory, a landscape of shifting pack ice, blinding white storms, and a gray, churning surface that hovers permanently at the brink of freezing. It is a world that seems utterly hostile to the fragile concepts of warmth and life. But beneath that iron-gray ceiling lies the richest kitchen on Earth. During the short, explosive summer months, 24 hours of continuous, piercing sunlight hitches a ride on upwelling deep ocean currents, triggering a monumental biological explosion. Billions of tiny shrimp-like amphipods and dense clouds of nutrient-rich zooplankton bloom in the cold column, carpet-bombing the muddy sea floor with a thick layer of organic wealth. This is the Great Northern Engine, a colossal reservoir of pure energy that draws the largest travelers on the planet to its freezing tables. Moving through this icy soup like a living continent is our protagonist, a mature female gray whale. Stretching nearly 50 feet in length and weighing a staggering 40 tons, her massive body is a historical archive of the sea. Her dark charcoal skin is completely crusted with patches of ivory-colored barnacles and orange whale lice, creating a rugged, rocky texture that looks more like a weathered tectonic shelf than a living mammal. She has spent more than 30 years navigating the deep maritime highways of the globe, surviving commercial hunting eras, steering clear of industrial shipping lanes, and reading the subtle variations of the Earth's magnetic grid with flawless accuracy. She is the ancient matriarch. She is a majestic, wandering island of ancestral wisdom, a sentient map that carries the memories of 10,000 migrations carved into her very marrow. For the past 5 months, the matriarch has done nothing but feed diving to the freezing seafloor, scooping up massive mouthfuls of mud and straining millions of tiny amphipods through her rigid baleen plates. She has built up a massive, thick layer of energy-dense blubber, a vital insurance policy designed to fuel her body through a monumental journey that lies ahead. For her biological clock is ticking with ruthless precision. Deep within her womb, a magnificent, hidden life has reached its final stage of maturity. She cannot give birth in these freezing northern waters. The sub-zero temperatures would freeze a newborn calf to death before its blubber layer could ever form. The cold kitchen that sustains the mother would become a graveyard for her child. Driven by an ancient, unyielding command written into her DNA, the matriarch turns her massive flukes away from the Arctic ice fields and faces south. She initiates a monumental 5,000-mile pilgrimage, an epic maritime odyssey that will take her down the entire coast of North America, past the volatile swells of the Pacific Northwest, around the treacherous capes of California, and down into the sheltered, sun-drenched lagoons of Baja California, Mexico. For over 2 months, she swims without eating, burning through her hard-earned blubber reserves to fuel every stroke of her massive tail. Her entire existence focused on a single warm destination, where the water is calm, the salt density is high, and the conditions are perfect for a miracle. The transition from the frozen north to the subtropical shallow lagoons of Ojo de Liebre is nothing short of a geographical resurrection. Here, enclosed by vast deserts and protected from the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific by massive sandbars, the water turns to a warm, dense, turquoise silk. The salinity is so high that it creates an extraordinary natural buoyancy, an aquatic cradle that lifts any weight with effortless gentleness. It is here, in this quiet sanctuary of light and heat, that the matriarch's long journey reaches its majestic destination. The 5,000-mile pilgrimage dissolves into the sand, and the ancient traveler prepares to bring a new voyager into the light. The birth of a gray whale is a monumental spectacle of scale and immediate vulnerability. Emerging, tail first, into the warm, highly saline water, the newborn calf enters the planet not as a microscopic speck, but as a 2,000-pound titan. Measuring nearly 15 feet long from its smooth, dark snout to its unformed flukes, this newborn is already larger than most terrestrial mammals will ever grow. But do not let the sheer physical scale fool you. In the context of the deep ocean, this massive infant is the innocent voyager, a fragile, completely defenseless child entering an arena that offers no quarter to the uninitiated. He enters the world with no survival experience, a brain that has never processed a shadow, and lungs that have never tasted a single breath of air. The first seconds of his life are a matter of absolute survival. Like all marine mammals, the innocent voyager is a creature of the sky trapped in a body of the sea. He must breathe, or he will drown. But his muscles are weak. His flukes are still soft and curled from months of confinement within the womb, and he does not yet understand how to navigate the buoyancy of his own flesh. Sensing his struggle, the ancient matriarch slides her massive, barnacle-crusted rostrum beneath his belly. With an exquisite, heart-breaking tenderness that defies her 40-ton scale, she lifts his heavy body out of the water, hoisting him toward the sunbeams until his blowhole breaks the surface for the very first time. With that first explosive breath, the education of the voyager begins. The mother rolls onto her side, exposing her mammary glands, and expels a thick, pinkish milk that is over 50% fat, so dense and rich that it possesses the consistency of cottage cheese, allowing it to travel through the salt water without dissolving. The calf nurses greedily, swallowing over 50 gallons of this concentrated energy every single day. The results are astonishing. The innocent voyager gains nearly 9 pounds of pure muscle and blubber every single hour, rapidly building the thick, insulating coat he will need to survive the freezing waters of the North. To cross the threshold that separates the shallow, salt, dense warmth of the Mexican lagoons from the open ocean is to step directly into a theater of unmitigated exposure. As the ancient matriarch guides her newborn son past the turbulent, churning white foam of the protective sandbars, the turquoise silk of Baja California dissolves instantly into the cold, deep, terrifying obsidian of the open Pacific Ocean. The highway that stretches ahead of them is not a welcoming path. It is a 5,000-mile gauntlet, a relentless maritime corridor that hugs the jagged, unforgiving coastline of a continent bounded on one side by crashing surf and shallow rocks, and on the other by the infinite crushing depths of the abyssal plain. For a 40-ton mother who has not tasted a single morsel of food in over half a year, whose internal organs are actively consuming themselves to produce milk, and for a young calf whose blubber layer is still thin, soft, and unformed, this migration is not a mere traversal of geography. It is a grueling, long-form war of attrition against distance, structural exhaustion, and an elite network of apex executioners who have spent millions of years perfecting the mathematics of the ambush. The entire strategy of this monumental voyage is written in the ancient library of the mother's instinct, a genetic map passed down through millions of years of cetacean survival. She understands with absolute clarity that out in the deep blue water where the continental shelf drops into thousands of fathoms of pure emptiness, they are entirely visible. Their massive, slow-moving shadows are silhouetted against the ambient light leaking down from the surface, creating a neon sign for anything hunting in the dark. To minimize this existential danger, she chooses a path of extreme, exhausting caution. She hugs the shallow surf zone, swimming so close to the roaring kelp forests and jagged underwater cliffs that the spray of the breaking waves constantly washes over her blowhole. She transforms her massive, scarred body into a physical barrier, keeping her innocent voyager pinned strictly between her heavy flank and the shallow, rocky shoreline where large predators fear to shallow up. In this narrow corridor, she teaches her son the first great lesson of the open sea: the physics of hydrodynamic draft. By positioning his young body directly behind her massive shoulder, the calf slips into a pocket of displaced water, a low-resistance vacuum where the momentum of the mother's 40-ton frame pulls the child forward. It is an aquatic umbilical cord of motion, allowing the calf to match her pace across thousands of miles while consuming only a fraction of his own precious caloric reserves. But the geography of the North American Pacific coast does not allow for a permanent sanctuary. As they push further north, past the rugged capes of California, the shallow continental shelf abruptly fractures. The seafloor plunges violently downward, carved into colossal underwater canyons, black basements, and bottomless trenches that cut deep into the coastline like subterranean fjords. These are the deep water intersections, the unavoidable marine crossroads where the coastal highway is forced to cross the open mouth of the abyss. To cross these gaps, the mother must abandon the safety of the rocks and lead her child out into the open, unprotected blue column suspended over a dark, vertical void. And it is precisely here, within these cold, blue intersections, that the true terror of the migration lies in wait. For these trenches are the sovereign hunting grounds of the most formidable, highly calculated cooperative killers on the planet, the wolf packs of the deep. They are orcas, not the resident pods that hunt salmon along the inland passages, but the transients, larger, silent, mammal-eating apex cetaceans that operate with the chilling discipline of a nomadic military unit. Armed with massive interlocking teeth designed to crush bone, high-speed acoustic radar that can map a target from miles away, and a collective intelligence that rivals our own social structures, they do not hunt by raw, chaotic impulse. They hunt by choreography, by strategy,
and by an unyielding discipline passed down through matriarchal lineages across thousands of generations. They know the seasonal schedule of the gray whale migration with absolute calendar-like precision. They know that somewhere along the edge of the deep canyons, a starving, exhausted mother will eventually emerge from the shallows, carrying with her a tender, fat-rich prize that has not yet learned how to defend itself or fight the current. The wolf pack sits in the black depths of the trench, turning off their own echolocation to remain entirely silent and invisible, listening through the liquid space for the rhythmic, heavy,
low-frequency thudding of the matriarch's flukes echoing through the water column. They do not rush. They wait for the perfect spatial coordinates to deploy their trap. The ambush over the deep trench is deployed with terrifying silent velocity. The acoustic tranquility of the open sea shatters as a pod of 9 transient orcas materializes from the obsidian void, striking from multiple vectors simultaneously like a coordinated strike squadron. They do not waste their energy attacking the 40-ton matriarch directly. They understand that her massive tail flukes possess the kinetic force to shatter their jaws, crush their skulls, and break their ribs in a single blow. Instead, their entire tactical focus is directed at a single vulnerable coordinate, the innocent voyager. They move in with surgical precision, using their multi-ton bodies to ram the calf from beneath, attempting to disrupt his swimming rhythm, break his contact with the mother, and force him away from the shelter of her flank. They are trying to execute their primary objective, to separate the child from the fortress, to isolate him in the open column where he can be drowned, deflated, and consumed. The water turns into a chaotic white water vortex of screaming acoustics, violent physical displacement, and primeval terror. The orcas take turns leaping completely out of the sea, using their immense weight to slam down directly onto the calf's blowhole to prevent him from taking a breath, while others swim beneath him, blowing dense, blinding curtains of tactical bubbles to confuse his senses and disrupt his orientation. The calf panics, his high-pitched, desperate distress whistles cutting through the roar of the sea as his lungs begin to fill with fluid. But the ancient matriarch does not retreat, nor does she surrender to the mathematics of the attack. Infused with a sudden, furious rush of adrenaline that shatters her starvation-induced fatigue, she throws her massive frame into the very center of the wolf pack. She fires her fluke like a battering ram, clearing a path through the predators by pure mass, and deploys the ultimate maneuver of maternal devotion. She rolls completely onto her back, sinking her spine beneath the surface, and positions her massive, soft underbelly directly beneath her drowning son. With her broad pectoral fins, she reaches out, scooping his 2,000-pound body out of the suffocating water, lifting him entirely onto her stomach like a living island. She hoists him into the sky, holding his blowhole into the air so that he can breathe the clean oxygen of the atmosphere, using her own 40-ton body as an impenetrable organic shield between her child and the slamming jaws of the predators beneath. She becomes both shield and fortress. She will let them tear at her own flesh before they touch her child. For over 2 hours, the siege of flesh continues over the bottomless canyon. The orcas ram the mother's underbelly, their razor-sharp teeth, leaving deep, bloody gashes across her skin, stripping away chunks of her remaining blubber, trying to force her to roll over and drop her prize. They bite at her flukes, clamp down on her flippers, and try to exhaust her respiratory system. But the ancient matriarch possesses a strength that cannot be calculated by blubber reserves, muscle mass, or biological stamina alone. It is a strength forged in the absolute evolutionary gravity of maternal love, a force that shatters the sterile predictions of natural selection. She holds her breath until her lungs burn. She endures the agonizing, bone-crushing impact of their jaws, and she keeps her son lifted toward the starlight, refusing to yield a single square inch of her body to the executioners. Slowly, the mathematics of the hunt begin to shift. The wolf pack has expended massive amounts of energy in their high-velocity, coordinated assault, yet they have failed to break the perimeter of the mother's spine. Their stamina is draining, their coordination is fracturing under the weight of her stubborn, unyielding defiance. And the coastal tide is beginning to push the entire battle back toward the shallow, rocky shelf, where the orcas lose their deep water maneuverability, recognizing that the price of the kill has far surpassed its caloric reward. The lead matriarch of the orca pod emits a sharp, metallic whistle, signaling a total retreat. The wolf pack dissolves back into the black depths of the canyon, vanishing into the obsidian void as quickly as they arrived, leaving the battlefield silent and stained with red. The ancient matriarch slowly rolls back over, allowing her son to slide down into the water beside her. She is bleeding from a dozen wounds, her skin is shredded, and her energy reserves are critically close to absolute zero. She is so exhausted that her massive flukes can barely hold her head above the waterline. But as she presses her barnacle-crusted nose against his smooth, uninjured flank, checking his breath in the dim, amber light of the Pacific dawn, she does not hesitate. She raises her massive flukes, catches the rhythm of the northward current, and takes another step forward. The gauntlet has taken its tax. Her body has paid the price in blood and flesh. But the Voyager is alive. The highway is still open. And the odyssey of the matriarch continues toward the frozen promise of the North. The retreat of the hunting pack leaves behind a quietness that feels almost unnatural. A heavy, suspended silence that settles over the blood-stained surface of the Monterey Canyon. The open ocean, having just hosted a multi-hour siege of raw bone and tearing teeth, offers no grand resolution, no sweeping cinematic applause for the survivors. The waters slowly cycle their deep currents, moving with cold, mechanical indifference, washing away the crimson clouds and dissolving the acoustic memory of the battle into the thousands of miles of surrounding blue desert. For the ancient matriarch, the victory is not marked by a sudden restoration of strength, but by a terrifying total confrontation with her own biological limits. Her massive flukes, which served as the ultimate weapons of defense against the killers, now move with a slow, trembling, almost desperate cadence. Every inch forward is a calculation against total muscular collapse. Her body is entirely depleted. Her skin is carved by the teeth of her enemies, and her breathing is a shallow, ragged gasp that rattles through her blowhole. Yet she does not stop. She cannot afford the luxury of rest in the open column. Driven by an internal compass that reads the subtle, invisible vibrations of the Earth's magnetic grid, she forces her scarred frame forward, dragging her innocent Voyager through the final treacherous miles of the deep-water intersection. And then, as they cross the northern shelf of the Pacific Northwest, the geography of the sea floor undergoes a profound, miraculous resurrection. The bottomless trenches and black chasms abruptly slide away, replaced by a rising, gentle topography of sunlit stone and shallow granite reefs. The dark, terrifying obsidian of the pelagic void begins to soften, shifting into a warm, radiant emerald as they enter one of the most magnificent protective sanctuaries on the face of the planet, the giant kelp forests. We spend so much of our time feeling small, drifting through our own modern wildernesses of isolation, doubt, and fear. We look at the storms gathering on our horizons, we feel the sharp teeth of the challenges that lie in wait over our own deep trenches, and we wonder if we have the architecture to survive the crossing. We look at the vast, indifferent systems around us, and we fear that our individual breath does not matter. But the Ballad of the Gray Whale offers a profound, unyielding anchor for the human spirit. It tells us that our vulnerability is not our undoing, that our willingness to care for something beyond our own skin is the ultimate technology of survival. For this is the great secret written into the marrow of the ancient matriarch, that love is not a soft sentimentality born of safety. Love is a tectonic force. It is an evolutionary superpower, a deliberate, beautiful defiance of the dark. It is the only entity on this planet capable of looking into the mouth of the abyss, feeling the full, crushing weight of the world's indifference, and answering with an absolute, immovable no. It is the force that builds the cradles, shields the innocent, and opens the highways across the blue desert. A gentle swell moves through the kelp canopy, causing the giant amber fronds to bow in unison like ancient priests in mid-prayer. The matriarch commands a slow, powerful stroke of her flukes, sliding her massive body forward through the emerald light, her son riding effortlessly in her wake. They have survived the gauntlet, they have rewritten the map, and now they must continue their journey toward the frozen promise of the far north. The road ahead is still long, the waters are still cold, and the arena will challenge them again. But they move forward with a quiet, majestic confidence, knowing that they carry within their blood the ultimate code of the deep, a love that has crossed the world, broken the hunters, and proven that the song of life will always outlast the silence of the sea. To step inside this underwater forest is to cross a threshold into an entirely different dimension of existence. Towering from the rocky seafloor 80 feet below, all the way to the sun-drenched surface, the giant kelp Macrocystis pyrifera creates a dense, magnificent cathedral of living gold and amber. Its massive, translucent fronds grow at an astonishing rate of 2 feet a day, weaving together to form a thick, floating canopy that completely blankets the surface water, fracturing the incoming sunlight into dancing, celestial spears of emerald light. This is an organic fortress, a dense marine jungle that alters the very physics of the ocean. The thick overlapping walls of the kelp blades act as natural shock absorbers, slowing down the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific swells and turning the inner corridors into a labyrinth of absolute calm. For the exhausted travelers, this forest is an impenetrable shield. The transient orcas, despite their immense tactical intelligence and speed, will not enter the dense kelp canopy. Their massive dorsal fins and rigid bodies are built for the high-velocity maneuvers of the open blue, and they know that to pursue a target into this thick green web is to risk immediate entanglement and disorientation. The wolf pack is locked out, barred by a fortress of vegetation. The silent emerald alleyways of the kelp forest offer something that the ancient matriarch has not felt since she left the shores of Mexico: total, unmitigated safety. Deep within the heart of this golden sanctuary, away from the breaking surf and the hunting corridors, the two giants finally come to a complete halt. Hovering effortlessly between the swaying amber columns, suspended in a warm bath of filtered sunlight, the ancient matriarch allows her massive flukes to rest. The relentless 5,000-mile rhythm of her migration pauses, and the silence of the forest becomes a sanctuary for her recovery. The innocent voyager, having survived the terrifying whitewater vortex of the ambush, slides along her flank, his movements no longer frantic or panicked, but slow, fluid, and filled with a quiet curiosity. He explores the soft, rubbery textures of the kelp blades, his young eyes tracking the tiny rockfish and bright orange Garibaldis that dance through the shadows of his new home. Then, drawn by a gravity that surpasses all survival instincts, the child turns his body back toward his protector. He swims slowly toward her massive, weathered head, hovering in the emerald light just inches away from her dark dinner plate eye. The ancient matriarch shifts her weight, her massive pectoral fin reaching out to gently guide his trajectory. Slowly, with an exquisite, heartbreaking precision that defies their multi-ton scale, they bring their rostra together. They touch noses. It is a quiet, breathless alignment of raw flesh and scarred bone, a sacred communion between the ancient map and the innocent voyager. In that single silent touch of their rostra, the entire weight of the 5,000-mile gauntlet is balanced and erased. The deep gashes on the mother's underbelly, the agonizing exhaustion of her starving tissue, The terror of the trench and the thousands of miles of cold, predatory water they have left behind, it is all converted into a singular monument of absolute triumph. They have crossed the world on a promise. They have stared into the jaws of the apex killers, broken through the algorithms of natural selection, and claimed their place within the golden cathedral of the North. The Voyager takes a deep, clean breath of air through the canopy, his blowhole breaking the surface in perfect synchronization with his mother's. They are home. They are safe. And as they float together within the swaying amber light, the physical drama of their survival transitions into a profound universal meditation, a truth that echoes far beyond the boundaries of the sea. The golden light of the kelp forest continues to drift across the scarred skin of the ancient matriarch, illuminating the deep ivory of her barnacles and the freshly torn crimson wounds left by the wolfback. She remains perfectly still, a living reef of bone and muscle resting in the emerald womb of the Pacific Northwest. Beside her, the Voyager rests his small head against her flank, his breath rising in steady, quiet plumes through the amber canopy above. The battle is over. The geography has shifted from the terrifying open abyss to this domestic cathedral of light. And in this transition, the physical reality of their survival expands, transforming from a simple story of animal migration into a monumental testament to the invisible forces that govern the living architecture of our world. We live our lives trapped on the surface of a highly structured, sterile understanding of reality. We look at the cosmos through the cold lens of mathematics, physics, and the rigid laws of mechanics. When we study the natural world, we are taught to see it as a massive, unfeeling machine, a biological ledger balanced strictly by the harsh equations of natural selection, where the fast consume the slow, the strong crush the weak, and the only rule is the preservation of the individual flesh. We look out at the deep ocean, and we see a wilderness of terrifying scale, a black desert of absolute pressure and sub-zero temperatures that feels entirely detached from our human concepts of emotion, empathy, and meaning. We convince ourselves that the universe is fundamentally indifferent, a cold arena of gears and teeth where sentimentality is a flaw and vulnerability is an immediate death sentence. But if you stand within this golden cathedral, if you witness the bleeding, starved body of a 40-ton mother holding her child above the suffocating waves, that sterile illusion completely collapses. The journey of the gray whale is a testament to an ancient, unyielding truth written into the very fabric of existence. The sea is vast, cold, and utterly indifferent to our survival. Yet across 5,000 miles of peril, a mother's devotion rewires the geography of the planet. It reminds us that no matter how dark the waters or how fierce the predators we encounter along our path, there is no force on earth more unstoppable than a love that refuses to let go. This odyssey shatters the narrow boundaries of our scientific materialism. It forces us to acknowledge that beneath the surface of the physical machine, there is a deeper primary currency driving the evolution of life. The ancient matriarch did not cross 5,000 miles of hostile ocean because it was mathematically logical. She did not endure 2 hours of agonizing mutilation over the Monterey Canyon because it balanced her caloric ledger. She did it because she was bound to the future by an absolute transcendent necessity. Her devotion is not an accidental byproduct of biology. It is the very engine that forces the cold universe to yield, transforming a predatory highway into a sanctuary of life. To spend hours diving into the intimate micro-dramas of the shallow meadows, the venomous coral sanctuaries, and the brutal high-velocity migration corridors of the pelagic void, is to slowly strip away the artificial arrogance of our modern terrestrial existence. We have built an insulated empire on dry land, looking out at the world of oceans as a foreign country, an alien wilderness that serves merely as a highway for our cargo ships, or a resource to be extracted and controlled. We look at the water from the safety of the shore, assuming that the history of consciousness and the language of meaning belong exclusively to the continents we walk upon. But the sea carries a longer memory, a deeper architecture of intelligence that was already ancient before the first human footprint was ever pressed into the mud. If you travel to the isolated wind-swept coastlines of Aotearoa, the land we now call New Zealand, the division between the land and the water begins to dissolve into the mist. Here, the indigenous Maori people decoded the deep geography of the Pacific, not through the cold lens of resource exploitation, but through a philosophy of absolute kinship. To them, the vast expanse of the blue water is not a setting, but the primordial ancestor. It is Tangaroa, the god of the deep, the living, breathing sovereign from whose liquid womb every fin, every feather, and every human pulse was originally synthesized. Tangaroa is a conscious entity, a heavy, restless intelligence whose moods are written in the changing shape of the swells, and whose laws are absolute, unyielding, and eternal. To survive on the surface of Tangaroa, to launch a fragile wooden canoe into the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific without a compass or a mechanical engine, required an order of magnitude of understanding that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. The ancient voyagers had to learn how to read the universe with their bare skin, memorizing subtle variations in water temperature, decoding the chemical signatures of drifting seaweed, and lying down on the floor of their vessels to feel the deep subterranean pulse of invisible ocean swells. Moving through this sacred architecture of wind and current, alongside the human voyagers were the ultimate masters of the map, the great whales, known in the Maori tongue as tohora. These majestic mammals were celebrated as the navigators of destiny, the divine emissaries of Tangaroa himself, sent to act as guardians, advisors, and living bridges between the human spirit and the mysteries of the sea. Long before humans ever drew borders on paper or calculated the position of the stars, the whales had already memorized the great magnetic highways of the planet. Maori elders speak of an invisible language, an energetic frequency where in times of absolute crisis, when stars were swallowed by cyclonic storms, the whales would materialize from the obsidian depths. They would position their massive multi-ton bodies directly in front of the capsizing canoes, acting as living breakwaters against the crushing fury of the Pacific swells. They would lead the humans through the shifting walls of water, drafting them through the storm, just as the gray whale mother drafts her innocent voyager through the gauntlet of the open sea. To survive on the surface of Tangaroa, to launch a fragile wooden canoe into the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific without a compass or a mechanical engine, required an order of magnitude of understanding that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. The ancient voyagers had to learn how to read the universe with their bare skin, memorizing subtle variations in water temperature, decoding the chemical signatures of drifting seaweed, and lying down on the floor of their vessels to feel the deep subterranean pulse of invisible ocean swells. Moving through this sacred architecture of wind and current, alongside the human voyagers were the ultimate masters of the map, the great whales, known in the Maori tongue as tohora. These majestic mammals were celebrated as the navigators of destiny, the divine emissaries of Tangaroa himself, sent to act as guardians, advisors, and living bridges between the human spirit and the mysteries of the sea. Long before humans ever drew borders on paper or calculated the position of the stars, the whales had already memorized the great magnetic highways of the planet. Maori elders speak of an invisible language, an energetic frequency where, in times of absolute crisis, when stars were swallowed by cyclonic storms, the whales would materialize from the obsidian depths. They would position their massive, multi-ton bodies directly in front of the capsizing canoes, acting as living breakwaters against the crushing fury of the Pacific swells. They would lead the humans through the shifting walls of water, drafting them through the storm, just as the gray whale mother drafts her innocent voyager through the gauntlet of the open sea. To survive on the surface of Tangaroa, to launch a fragile wooden canoe into the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific without a compass or a mechanical engine required an order of magnitude of understanding that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. The ancient voyagers had to learn how to read the universe with their bare skin, memorizing subtle variations in water temperature, decoding the chemical signatures of drifting seaweed, and lying down on the floor of their vessels to feel the deep subterranean pulse of invisible ocean swells. Moving through this sacred architecture of wind and current, alongside the human voyagers were the ultimate masters of the map, the great whales, known in the Maori tongue as tohora. These majestic mammals were celebrated as the navigators of destiny, the divine emissaries of Tangaroa himself, sent to act as guardians, advisors, and living bridges between the human spirit and the mysteries of the sea. Long before humans ever drew borders on paper or calculated the position of the stars, the whales had already memorized the great magnetic highways of the planet. Maori elders speak of an invisible language, an energetic frequency where, in times of absolute crisis, when stars were swallowed by cyclonic storms, the whales would materialize from the obsidian depths. They would position their massive, multi-ton bodies directly in front of the capsizing canoes, acting as living breakwaters against the crushing fury of the Pacific swells. They would lead the humans through the shifting walls of water, drafting them through the storm, just as the gray whale mother drafts her innocent voyager through the gauntlet of the open sea. To survive on the surface of Tangaroa, to launch a fragile wooden canoe into the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific without a compass or a mechanical engine, required an order of magnitude of understanding that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. The ancient voyagers had to learn how to read the universe with their bare skin, memorizing subtle variations in water temperature, decoding the chemical signatures of drifting seaweed, and lying down on the floor of their vessels to feel the deep subterranean pulse of invisible ocean swells. Moving through this sacred architecture of wind and current, alongside the human voyagers were the ultimate masters of the map, the great whales, known in the Maori tongue as tohora. These majestic mammals were celebrated as the navigators of destiny, the divine emissaries of Tangaroa himself, sent to act as guardians, advisors, and living bridges between the human spirit and the mysteries of the sea. Long before humans ever drew borders on paper or calculated the position of the stars, the whales had already memorized the great magnetic highways of the planet. Maori elders speak of an invisible language, an energetic frequency where, in times of absolute crisis, when stars were swallowed by cyclonic storms, the whales would materialize from the obsidian depths. They would position their massive multi-ton bodies directly in front of the capsizing canoes, acting as living breakwaters against the crushing fury of the Pacific swells. They would lead the humans through the shifting walls of water, drafting them through the storm, just as the gray whale mother drafts her innocent voyager through the gauntlet of the open sea. To survive on the surface of Tangaroa, to launch a fragile wooden canoe into the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific without a compass or a mechanical engine, required an order of magnitude of understanding that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. The ancient voyagers had to learn how to read the universe with their bare skin, memorizing subtle variations in water temperature, decoding the chemical signatures of drifting seaweed, and lying down on the floor of their vessels to feel the deep, subterranean pulse of invisible ocean swells. Moving through this sacred architecture of wind and current, alongside the human voyagers were the ultimate masters of the map, the great whales, known in the Maori tongue as tohora. These majestic mammals were celebrated as the navigators of destiny, the divine emissaries of Tangaroa himself, sent to act as guardians, advisors, and living bridges between the human spirit and the mysteries of the sea. Long before humans ever drew borders on paper or calculated the position of the stars, the whales had already memorized the great magnetic highways of the planet. Maori elders speak of an invisible language, an energetic frequency where in times of absolute crisis, when stars were swallowed by cyclonic storms, the whales would materialize from the obsidian depths. They would position their massive, multi-ton bodies directly in front of the capsizing canoes, acting as living breakwaters against the crushing fury of the Pacific swells. They would lead the humans through the shifting walls of water, drafting them through the storm, just as the gray whale mother drafts her innocent voyager through the gauntlet of the open sea. To survive on the surface of Tangaroa, to launch a fragile wooden canoe into the crushing, unpredictable fury of the open Pacific without a compass or a mechanical engine, required an order of magnitude of understanding that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. The ancient voyagers had to learn how to read the universe with their bare skin, memorizing subtle variations in water temperature, decoding the chemical signatures of drifting seaweed, and lying down on the floor of their vessels to feel the deep subterranean pulse of invisible ocean swells. Moving through this sacred architecture of wind and current, alongside the human voyagers were the ultimate masters of the map, the great whales, known in the Maori tongue as tohora. These majestic mammals were celebrated as the navigators of destiny, the divine emissaries of Tangaroa himself, sent to act as guardians, advisors, and living bridges between the human spirit and the mysteries of the sea. Long before humans ever drew borders on paper or calculated the position of the stars, the whales had already memorized the great magnetic highways of the planet. Maori elders speak of an invisible language, an energetic frequency where, in times of absolute crisis, when stars were swallowed by cyclonic storms, the whales would materialize from the obsidian depths. They would position their massive multi-ton bodies directly in front of the capsizing canoes, acting as living breakwaters against the crushing fury of the Pacific swells. They would lead the humans through the shifting walls of water, drafting them through the storm, just as the gray whale mother drafts her innocent voyager through the gauntlet of the open sea. The eye of the whale, a dark, teacup-sized sphere of ancient wisdom, locks directly into the glass of the diver's lens. It is not the dull, instinctual stare of a fish, nor the reactionary gaze of a land reptile. It is an eye of bottomless, liquid depth, a dark mirror holding a chilling, ancient, and deeply observant intelligence that has watched the seasons of this planet change for 10 million years. In that single gaze, 10 million years of history looks back at a species that has barely begun to learn. In that single gaze, 10 million years of history looks back at a species that has barely begun to learn. The ocean, our primordial ancestor, is under siege. In the open highways, massive cargo vessels and high-intensity military sonar blast millions of watts of acoustic smog through the water columns, blinding species who see through sound and driving them to beach themselves in despair. Below the surf, an artificial plague has materialized. Billions of tons of plastics clog the currents, while warming waters force the global ocean engine into respiratory failure, bleaching the coral sanctuaries into white graveyards of calcified bone. We are breaking the sacred contract signed at the dawn of time. The ocean, our primordial ancestor, is under siege. In the open highways, massive cargo vessels and high-intensity military sonar blast millions of watts of acoustic smog through the water columns, blinding species who see through sound and driving them to beach themselves in despair. Below the surf, an artificial plague has materialized. Billions of tons of plastics clog the currents, while warming waters force the global ocean engine into respiratory failure, bleaching the coral sanctuaries into white graveyards of calcified bone. We are breaking the sacred contract signed at the dawn of time. We commit these atrocities because we suffer from a profound cultural amnesia. We look out at the horizon and see an alien world, a wilderness of darkness and scale that seems entirely detached from our concrete cities and digital screens. But we forget our own chemistry. The salt in our tears, the iron in our blood, the rhythm of our very breath. It was all synthesized in the cradle of the deep. We did not simply discover the ocean, we left it behind. And in protecting these beautiful, selfless, foolish custodians of the currents, we are not merely saving the sea, we are remembering who we are. The ocean does not need our technology to repair its rhythms. It merely needs our humility. It demands that we step back from our chaotic race for consumption and listen once more to the ancestral echo vibrating within our own veins. The sun sets over the global highway, painting the endless blue canvas in shades of gold and obsidian. The tides will continue to rise, and the great innovators of the deep will continue to sing into the darkness. The question is no longer whether the sea will endure, but whether we have the wisdom to remain a part of its song. For the story of the deep is the ultimate mirror of our soul, and as long as the world of oceans breathes, the ballad of the blue must never fade.